And just to kind of give you guys an idea of how difficult this adjustment period was for me, I would get home every single day with a killer migraine, run straight to the bathroom to puke my guts out, and then lock myself in my room and lay in bed, turn the lights out, and just sleep through the night until I had to wake up again the next morning to go to work. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and it was just miserable. I was miserable, and I remember my parents saying, "I don't think this is normal. If you're struggling this much to keep up, then maybe a full-time job is too much for you. Maybe um, try looking for a part-time job, something that's more flexible." And today is Tuesday, July 9th, and this is like the third or fourth video this week. So I think I'm pretty hyper focused on posting videos at this point. And I want to take advantage of the fact that I'm on summer break, because once I go back to work in August, everything's just chaotic and I feel like I never really have any time to post. But anyway, I wanted to talk about exposure for social anxiety and kind of how exposure therapy has worked for me. If you've been following my channel, you know that social anxiety is something that I have been dealing with for a very long time. I'm very introverted, but I also think that my anxiety keeps me from really interacting with other people, going out, not just the introvertedness, but the anxiety tied to it all. And I have videos talking about how I grew up with cerebral palsy, and I was heavily bullied because of the way I walk, because I walk with a limp. I also grew up with overprotective parents, and so I grew up with this feeling of incompetence because they kind of babied me a lot. And they were also somewhat physically and verbally abusive, which is a weird combination, but they also didn't let me do a lot of things on my own because of my disability. And I think because of that, I grew up with this huge sense of incompetence. But social anxiety was a very real part of that. And it's something that I still suffer from. But I want to talk about how I threw myself into a full-time 9 to 5 job. Well, 7:30 to 4 to be more exact. About a year and a half ago, I'm going to school for speech and language pathology, so that's what you need to get your master's degree and to become a speech therapist. And I really needed a job because I was struggling financially. And I don't drive, so I either take Uber wherever I need to go or take public transportation, or more often than not, my parents will give me rides to wherever I need to go. And so here in the state of California, California is in such desperate need of speech therapists to work in the schools that they are willing to hire you. Not every school, but there are some school districts out there that are willing to hire you on a waiver before you even complete your master's degree program and your accreditation. So long as you can prove that you've been accepted to, or that you are working on your master's degree, which I am. So in December of 2022, I applied for one of those jobs and I was interviewed and I got the job. And let me tell you, it was a huge adjustment period. I've never had a full-time job before. I've done babysitting gigs, tutoring gigs. I've also done, I've been a reading specialist, but that's also been part-time, where I get to choose how many kids I take on. And I would either, usually it's like one-on-one, and I would teach the kid at the library or in their home for about an hour and a half, 2 to 3 times a week, and that was it. So my work schedule has always been flexible. I also have an Etsy shop where I would post like designs and custom t-shirts and invitations I have always kind of been my own boss in a sense. So I've always had that freedom that I feel I needed because I tend to burn out pretty quickly, especially if I'm interacting with people. So that first couple of weeks where I had to wake up at 6 in the morning to get ready to be at work at 7:30, and be there from 7:30 to 4. Um, and I work at two different school sites, and one of those sites I share I share a room with the other speech therapist and the speech therapist assistant. And knowing how I am, that I'm very introverted and I very much love having my own space, that was incredibly difficult to kind of get used to. Um, and there was so many aspects about the job because as a school speech therapist, you really have weekly meetings, sometimes several meetings a week, where you are meeting with parents. You meet with the IEP team. So that is the team that is providing special education services to the child. So that includes the speech therapist, which would be me, an administrator, which would be like a vice principal or a principal. Um, who else? The teacher, so the student's teacher, and any other service members that may be providing special education services to the child. So that could be the school psychologist, that could be the occupational therapist. Typically, it's a meeting of minimum of 3 people and anywhere from 3 to like 7 or 8 people. And we all kind of have to do our part. So I have to report out on what the kid is working on in speech, go over his goals or his or her goals, and go over the progress and recommendation for the next school year. And for somebody with social anxiety, let me tell you, it was a nightmare. I was dreading my first IEP meeting, and I think that my supervisor kind of tried to gently um, start putting me in meetings. Like for the first meeting, she said, "You're going to take this kid's case over next month, and his annual IEP meeting is coming up. So you're going to come with me, and I'm going to report out on the assessment that I conducted. But you're going to report out on his goals for next year, since you're going to be the one working with him. So it'll be a good idea for you to kind of uh, meet the parents and introduce yourself." I was I was shitting bricks. I was so terrified. Um, and I remember I went to the meeting and I listened attentively to everything that my supervisor had to say. And then she kind of passed me a paper that had his goals for next year written on it. And my job was just to kind of introduce myself and say, "Hey, my name is Janelle. I will be taking over so and so's case starting next year. Good to meet you. And these are the goals that we're going to be working on." I couldn't do it. My hands were shaking. And one of the side effects of my social anxiety, although it's not as bad anymore, but it was pretty bad at the time, is my entire face will turn red. So from my neck up to here, right? And I'm pretty white. I'm pretty light skinned, so it's quite noticeable. And I literally froze. I couldn't do it. So my supervisor had to take the paper back and report the goals out for me. And I felt so bad. Afterwards, I felt like a complete failure, like what is wrong with me? This is something that I have to learn to do if I want to be a speech therapist. And just to kind of give you guys an idea of how difficult this adjustment period was for me, I would get home every single day with a killer migraine, run straight to the bathroom to puke my guts out, and then lock myself in my room and lay in bed, turn the lights out, and just sleep through the night until I had to wake up again the next morning to go to work. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and it was just miserable. I was miserable. And I remember my parents saying, I don't think this is normal. If you're struggling this much to keep up, then maybe a full-time job is too much for you. Maybe um, try looking for a part-time job, something that's more flexible. And I was very, very close to kind of calling it quits, but I stuck with it, right? And after about the first month, when I started kind of getting into the flow and getting the hang of things, I think part of the problem too was that I hadn't even started on my child speech and language classes yet in my master's program. I had only been working with adults. And so all of this was new to me, and I felt completely lost, and I felt like a huge imposter. So that does not help at all when it comes to anxiety. So um, I think after about a month, things started getting better because I had observed my supervisor for a while, taken notes, started getting into the flow of therapy. But I'm glad I stuck with it. All that to say that since then, I have been to countless IEP meetings and seminars and meetings with supervisors and, uh, you know, phone and telephone conversations and conferences with parents, some of them that have gone well and others that haven't. And while I still have that lingering social anxiety, that fear that is always kind of there, I don't blush as much anymore. And when I do blush, it's not that big a deal. I just kind of started accepting that, like, I'm probably going to blush while I'm talking. Oh well. My ears and my entire face is going to turn red and I'm going to look like a tomato while I talk. And it is what it is. Um, and I think the worst was recently, a couple months ago, that I was just hyperventilating for some reason. And I think part of it was because it was my first Spanish only IEP meeting. I'm fluent in Spanish. Spanish is actually my first language. But, um, there's a difference between like formal academic language, including all that jargon that you have to learn for like special education terms, and the very casual language that I grew up with at home. And so I think that's what made me more nervous. So I was literally talking like this, right? Hyperventilating. And my supervisor was in the room, albeit she was trying to mind her own business, turned away from my meeting. She was like on her computer, but pretty sure that she could hear me hyperventilating. And I know the mom who I was talking to noticed because she kept looking at me and just giving me this weird look like, are you okay? So I made it through that meeting, hyperventilating, and it was very difficult and embarrassing. Um, And then when it was over, I asked the SLPA, so the speech therapist assistant, was that really terrible? Because it felt like terrible. Was it as bad as I felt it was? And she said, don't beat yourself up. I mean, it was your first Spanish only meeting, and I don't know if I could have done any better if I was in your place, right? So, um, we really are our own worst critics. Anyway, so as far as exposure therapy, I think that being exposed to constant meetings on a weekly basis, several weekly IEP meetings where I have to talk to parents and other educators and administrators, has kind of lessened the impact that social anxiety has on me. And so I'm still anxious. I still kind of dread the meetings, but I think I'm doing much better now than I did that very first meeting where I was shaking and I couldn't even talk. Um, and so, yeah, uh, all of this to say that I think exposure therapy is probably the best way for social anxiety, but you don't have to start like I did and throw yourself to the sharks where you have to meet with people weekly, several times a week. And I've said this before, I think if you even start with making a phone call if that makes you anxious, or greeting a cashier when you go to the store, and consider that a win, and then just work your way up from there to whatever you think the next attainable step is uh, in your mind, right? And I'm not a therapist. I'm a speech therapist, but I'm not a mental health therapist. So this is just something that I wanted to share with you guys, that has been kind of working for me as far as the social anxiety piece goes. The depression is a whole another thing. That is something that I don't think I've found an effective treatment for yet. So that's why I'm going to start the transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy in a couple of days on the 19th. And I posted a video about that, and I'll be kind of posting updates as I go to see if it improves my mood, and it's also supposed to do something for the anxiety as well. So but yeah, even with all of this constant interaction, and that it's lessened the symptoms of my social anxiety, just kind of being exposed to it over and over again, I still get home really, really super drained and just wanting some alone time, because I'm all talked out and I'm all peopled out. Um, and I don't know if that's something that's ever going to change. Uh, yeah. All right. I will be back.